For those of you who don't know, one of my favorite public people of all time is Cree Summer. I should say Cree Franks because Franks is her real last name. Summer's her middle name. And on today's episode of the podcast, I want to share a portion of an interview that she had, what she realized about what shut her down sexually. A lot of you know Cree was married for many years. They got divorced many years ago. She and her ex-husband have 2 daughters, and she has dated around. And recently, within the last year or so, she was dating a 26-year-old. Cree is 55. And I know that may, on the surface, sound kind of like what? But of course, we all know what the internet is, and we should all know by now. We have to kind of lean in and actually take in the information so we can fully understand the below the surface conversation, not just judge it on the surface. But this was such a wonderful conversation, and I feel like a lot of fully grown women who are sexually mature, not just emotionally mature, will appreciate this conversation, because sometimes as a woman, whether you're a married woman or a dating woman or a single woman, it takes time for you to get to know what causes you to be very open sexually with your partner or what shuts you down. And it takes being in tune with yourself. And what I mean by that is in tune with yourself emotionally. Like, this doesn't make me feel safe, or this makes me feel safe. And so a lot to cover on today's episode. So welcome. Thank you for joining all of us. I appreciate all of you. I know that we are going to enjoy this conversation. I will say, though, this conversation is not going to be for everybody. Not just because of the subject matter itself, but also because not all of us are sexually mature. I mean, you could be 65 and not be sexually mature. You could be 60 and not be emotionally mature. And so we know that age really doesn't mean anything when it comes to facets of maturity. And so only you know you and I know me. And so you know where you are, right? And so let's jump into the heart of this. I will put the link to her interview with Cree, and I'll tell you about the interviewer in just a moment. I'll put the link in the description box, so not the comment section. And also I'm going to put Shan's website in the description box as well. So Cree did this interview with Shan, S-H-A-N. Shan is a woman. Her and her husband, they have businesses together, and they have a podcast. Shan runs the podcast. Her husband is kind of in the background, called Lovers. And the whole point of this podcast is they focus on all things love and sex. I want to read a little bit from Shan's website because she has a very impressive repertoire, and I want to make sure that I don't miss anything. So I'm reading this directly from her website. I'm Shan. I'm a certified sex educator, a sexologist, American Board of Sexology, and I've got a master's in psychology. And some of you may know Shan as the teacher on Netflix's Too Hot to Handle. And of course, as I just mentioned, she's the host of her very own podcast, Lovers by Shan. And also she has a class on Masterclass called The Art of Sex Appeal. Now, I will tell you all how I found Shan. Actually, I found Shan by finding this interview with Cree Summer. I'm always on the lookout for anything Cree is doing. And when I learned last year that they were going to be rebooting or reprising A Different World, and that was such an important show in Black culture many years ago, I began to kind of just start keeping up with her a little bit more, following her on social media and all those things. And this led me to this interview. I have watched this interview at least 3 different times because it was one of those conversations, depending on where you are as a woman, right? Because we know things hit differently depending on where we are. How many of you ladies have learned that? If you're like me, you have books you read 20 years ago, and you got one thing out of them. And then the book comes across your desk, so to speak, now, and you read it and you get something totally different out of it, right? Because we're different. And so I've watched this interview 3 times because it was so good. There were so many different things that were like ahas and make you go shout out to Arsenio Hall. And so sometimes when something is so good to you, you can't digest everything you awakened to by the conversation in one sitting, if that makes any sense. And I think for those of you who are sexually mature, who are emotionally mature, you know exactly what I mean when I say that. So let's do this. What I want to do now, let me get over there again. I want to just pick up their conversation where Cree is talking about what she realized about herself. This interview, okay, got close to 400,000 views. It was so good. Again, it depends on where you are as a woman, whether it would be good to you or not, right? Whether you felt like it would be enlightening. So we can never really compare and say, oh, I listened to that and I got nothing out of it. Well, it could be dependent on where you are, right? It's an individual thing. So go ahead and adjust your volume. And I'm going to pick up their interview here. Now, by this point, they've been talking about a lot of nice, wonderful things. But now Cree, at 55, is saying what she realized about herself. So adjust your volume. Let's go.
And, I moved to LA at 16, and then I turned 17 a couple months later. And 6 months later, I was on Different World. So I've always been ferociously independent. And when the men in my life, my partners, expressed a fear of if we were going to be okay, I really had a visceral reaction to it. It took away my sex. Instantly, it would take away my sex. And there was something so extremely unattractive about, I have to be careful here because I don't want anyone to get the impression that I don't respect uncertainty or fear. Those are real things. Something about the approach to it that I don't want anyone to make me feel unsafe.
Yes.
If you're feeling unsafe, we can talk about it and investigate it together, but I don't want it to become my fear too, because I don't approach it that way. And it really has been the demise of some pretty long-term things in my life, yeah.
I think when people hear provide or they hear provision, we put lipstick on the pig, but we really just mean money.
We mean money. That's right.
That's
Capitalism.
not what you mean.
I don't mean money. Shit, all the broke motherfuckers that have been in my life and are in my arms, it's not money. And like I said, my family never had any money. It was that feeling that my father always had that we were going to be okay. And then it was never like, oh no, batten down the hatches, run, everybody scream, our hair's on fire. And when I've had men in my life approach me with that, oh no, I don't know what I'm going to do or what we're going to do, it was the end of us really doing anything. Yeah.
Did you know that then, or you know that now?
I had no idea. I had no idea that was turning me off. I just noticed that it would lead to the physical relationship would stymie. So now I'm happy to know that, because I would love to have a husband and a real partner, someone that we could get excited about the trials and tribulations about in life together. Yeah, that would be great.
That's so sexy, and to see that light in your eyes, I hope is very affirming for people. I'm actually not somebody who heavily subscribes to masculine and feminine, or
yes,
the idea of the rigidity of the binary, yet this conversation finds me quite a bit. And I think that that's because it's just been in the zeitgeist post-pandemic.
Yes.
Everyone's kind of thinking about it, and people are reflecting on it, and then pulling for them, what is true and what is not. So I think for some people, it can feel instantly triggering in a positive or negative way. If we say, you know what, if a man cannot provide a sense of safety, then he's not fuckable.
He's not my man. Yeah. He's not my man. Yeah. And you're right, sense of safety does not equate with coin. It equates with that feeling that you are the man that can make sure we're going to be okay, because you know we're going to be okay. You can't fake that.
Yeah.
You either know you're going to be okay or you're...
Now, I will stop and say this. If you haven't seen this full interview, don't judge Shan or anything you've heard based on the clip. And I really want to encourage all of you to do what I'm doing. I'm on a journey, and I've been on this journey for a number of years. I'm on a journey of slowing down and really listening to understand. Like, if you think you know what Shan was talking about based on what she just said about herself, then it would totally blow you away if you knew the rest of the conversation they were having. And then what she just said there would make better sense, because she's not non-binary. She's none of that. So to anchor ourselves and say, you know what? I know what that sounded like, but I didn't hear everything, so that means I really don't know what they were talking about. That's what I say to myself now. I know what that sounded like, but I only heard 2 minutes of an hour conversation, which means I don't know what they're talking about. And that takes, again, a lot of self-control. But I want to continue playing something, because now Shan is about to ask her about, were you able to communicate this to these men? And we're going to listen to what Cree had to say. So go ahead and adjust your volume again.
Like how your dad empowered that in you.
Yeah.
Would it have been possible for you to empower past partners with that, to give them...
No, I couldn't have done it then. Now I could. I didn't know what it was. I just knew I was so turned off. And I think I looked at it as a negative thing. Like, get your shit together, man. Step up. And I think also my reaction was, I'll take care of it. Because I've always felt very well endowed in a relationship. Like, you know.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop it there. By the way, the title of that episode is I Lost My Sex Drive Because He Never Did This, with Cree Summer. I think it's so important what we heard Cree say there, ladies. All of us who are sexually mature and emotionally mature. I'm only talking to us. Because it is so important as a woman to know yourself. To thyself be true. To thine own self be true. Because very often we heard Cree say there that she didn't know what this was about herself when she was married and when she had her subsequent relationships. By the way, her first boyfriend was at 19, and it was Kadeem Hardison, who played Dwayne on A Different World. But let me go ahead and finish what I was saying before. But she was saying how she didn't know what this was about herself. She only knew that if a man expressed fear of the future, so to speak, that it just totally shut her down sexually. And she found she just lost physical attraction to him. But now that she knows this about herself, going forward, that is something that she could communicate to whoever her partner is going to be in the future, her husband in the future, or her boyfriend or whatever. I think that's so important as women, that those two things are something we work on, whether you're married or dating right now. Understanding yourself as a woman empowers you to have such great relationships, because you can communicate. First of all, you know it yourself. You know, wait a minute, this right here causes me to close the door, right? And he doesn't know that. And so I need to communicate that. Sexually mature women, because some of you may misunderstand what I mean by that. You may think it means a woman who's had a whole bunch of sex. No, sexually mature women are women who know what they like sexually, and they can communicate. They don't have any problem communicating to their husband, to their boyfriend, whatever the situation, what they need, what they like, what they don't like, what they don't need, what makes them feel safe, what doesn't make them feel safe. And she doesn't feel coy. She doesn't feel, oh my gosh, I'm so embarrassed to say that. That is not a sexually mature woman. But it all starts first with self, right? And so I think it's really important for these types of conversations to be had on public platforms like Shan's. First of all, Shan has the expertise. She has the certifications, the degree. She has all those things to help navigate these types of conversations in a healthy way, so it doesn't devolve into silliness and ridiculousness, and then you have the people who can't handle those types of conversations without being silly because they're uncomfortable having that conversation. But then it's so important because you have a woman like Cree who is sexually mature now and emotionally mature as well and spiritually mature, and she has no problem. I mean, if you see this interview, Cree talks about this in such an easy way, not a moment of uncomfortableness. Again, that's an example of a woman who has become sexually mature. She can speak about her sexual needs, desires, etc., with a level of confidence because she knows herself. But what I was saying was, I think it's important that as a woman, you know yourself enough to be able to communicate with him, to him, and with him, what causes the door to close. Because most men just don't know that. And I've seen people be married for years and cannot talk about sex with each other. Can't talk about, maybe when we were first married, these are the things that turned me on. Now we've been married, however many years, and well, that just doesn't do it anymore. Or that's not a sensitive spot anymore. All those types of things that should be easily able to be discussed. I've seen people, like I said, be married for years and can't discuss even the most simplest things. And I've seen people who've been dating and have sex and never have had a conversation about what preferences before they even have sex. But the most important thing about this conversation was that she realized her ability to be free with her partner was tied to feeling emotionally safe. I think most, not all, but most women will say that that is the same thing for them. In this particular instance, for those of you who didn't hear all the conversation yet, or maybe you saw this interview a year ago, she started out talking about her father and how, even though they didn't have a lot of money, her father was never afraid of what that meant. If they didn't have gas, he figured it out. If they didn't have food, he figured it out. He never, if he was afraid, he never transferred that fear onto her and her mom. He never acted afraid. He saw it as, how are we going to make it through this, an exciting thing. Again, you have to watch the whole interview to kind of get the thing, to get the gist of it. But she talked about how she never realized that quality that her father had to make her feel safe emotionally, that there's nothing to be afraid of because daddy's got it. She didn't realize that was something that influenced her in her romantic relationships and in her marriage. And again, she just didn't know. I think it's so important to understand the connection between us as grown women and us as little girls. The men in our lives as young girls, how they made us either feel safe or not safe or unsafe. Because that is what we will see in our relationships with our partners. We will see it in the choice of a partner as well, which Cree talks a lot about in this episode. Matter of fact, Cree said at one point later in her conversation with Shan, and she said, I'm embarrassed to say this at 55. She said, but I've never actually chosen a good partner for myself. And she just talked a lot about, because there was just so much she didn't know about herself. And so tracing that back to childhood, and I know we've all heard this before, but it's just such a real thing that if you grew up in a space where, and remember, safe right now, we're not talking about necessarily physically safe. We're talking about emotional safety. And if you don't know the difference, and you may not, and that's okay. Remember, it's okay to not, what's okay is not to know. What's not okay is to remain in a state of not knowing. See, that's the problem. But if you don't know the difference between emotional safety and physical safety, or what emotionally safe even means, you can just look it up on the very same device you're listening to the sound of my voice on. But I think we have to recognize, if we grew up in spaces where we didn't feel emotionally safe with the men around us, that will translate into our relationships. I'm so blessed. Some of you are so blessed. My entire childhood, I always felt emotionally safe. always, always, even into my adulthood. I knew I could always, count on my dad, and if he was around, I didn't need to be worried about nothing. And that is a blessing. And of course, not all women have that or have had that, but there are a lot of women who have had that. And we don't want to discount the women that have had that because we want to focus on all the women who didn't have that, which is the way it goes in the world sometimes, right? But we have to remember everyone did have different experiences. But also in this conversation, when she talks about the revelation that she got of herself, that, wait a minute, that's what it always was for me. She could tie that into, well, then why did she choose men who were not stable financially? And as she sat there with Shan, it wasn't even really about coin. It was about, okay, so we don't have it, or you don't have it, but why do you have to translate that fear to me, that you're afraid of what's going to happen because you don't have it or because we don't have it? And I think that's where men miss it. Men don't understand that with some women, it's not always about coin or how much coin they have, but do you have a confidence, or do you have the confidence and the resourcefulness to be stable in a crisis enough to know we're going to make it out of this, and communicate that stability to your woman? And that's where men need to develop. She talked a lot about that, which was it was such an important nugget, because sometimes even for women, they think, well, I don't feel emotionally safe with him because he's not financially stable, or we're not financially stable. Maybe they're going through a rough season. He's lost a job, or he's been demoted or whatever, or laid off because of a resizing or a merger or something. But if that man can still communicate hope and fearlessness to you, it does make a difference. And Cree talked a lot about that, and so did Shan. Also, what was so impressive for me about this conversation is seeing two Black women who are fully in their feminine, fully in their selves as moms. They're both mothers. Shan has 2 kids as well, like Cree has 2 kids. And Shan's husband is always in the background there. Again, it's their business. They work together. His name is Jared. Seeing these 2 Black women who are able to sit at that table together and talk openly about things that very often women, Black women in particular, are not encouraged to talk about together. Of course, this was an interview, so of course it was a specific conversation, and I wouldn't say that this is the type of conversation you just go out and have with complete strangers that you don't know. But yet and still, even in herself, a woman needs to be able to know what shuts her down, as I said earlier, and what causes her to open up, and have the ability to communicate that to her partner. Again, whether it's her husband or her boyfriend, whatever her situation is. And if a woman recognizes she does not have the ability to do that, I think that's when she needs to, seek out understanding of herself. And there are all kinds of ways to do that, like therapy. We talk about that a lot, or reading self-help material on the subject in question, all those types of things. Another great thing about this conversation, where Cree talked about her sex was tied or is tied to her emotional safety, is defining what safety is for you. Now, overall, generally speaking, we know that emotional safety means that we feel safe to feel whatever we feel without judgment or, criticism or any of those things, right? But as a woman, you may have a totally different definition of what it means for you to feel emotionally safe. And again, that's something that only a woman can decide for herself, right? As I end, I want to say too, I think it's really important as women that we continue to become. A lot of you will remember Michelle Obama's book, her first memoir titled Becoming, that as a woman, we are always becoming. If you are a young woman right now, you're becoming. If you're in midlife right now, you're becoming. If you're in the third leg of your life, you're still becoming. And we should always be getting to know ourselves better and better and better, and able to communicate what we need and what we want, not just in our relationships, but on our jobs. Defining, I'm not like, I know I made a decision within the last few months, and I had to, talk with, different people in my life that it would affect, to make sure they were aware this is the decision I'm making, that I would not do any more late days anymore at the office. I'm just not doing it. And so if that means I have to find another job, that's what that means. But thank God that's not what it means, because I was able to communicate that with my boss. I practiced it with my best friend. What I'm going to say this, and she would play, we would role play. Well, what if she comes back with this? Then what are you going to say? And I just decided no more, unless it's absolutely necessary. And absolutely necessary, I had to define what absolutely necessary means. So again, as you are becoming, right, you're constantly changing. And what was okay 5 years ago on a job, in a relationship, with a family member, it ain't okay no more, right? And you have to be able to communicate that, right? And so I want to end our conversation with talking about some things that will help when it comes to a pleasurable and satisfying sex life, because this is what this episode was about. Well, the first thing is being emotionally safe with him. And if you're not partnered right now, you probably will be in the future. So these are things to start thinking about now. I think what's so detrimental to relationships, people wait. They try to wait until they've gotten into a relationship to learn stuff. No, learn it now. Gather the information now. Learn it now, so that when you meet him, or if you're a guy listening and you meet her, you are armed with knowledge. Remember, knowledge is power. We've totally forgotten that. People perish for the lack of knowledge. Relationships perish because people don't know stuff. And that's one of the things Cree said. She said a lot of her relationships ended because she just didn't know certain things about herself to communicate that to her partner. And then too, she said to Shan, even if she had known it and communicated, it doesn't mean necessarily that the relationship would have been saved, but yet and still being empowered to know and to communicate what you know. So the first thing, as I said, is I think it's important for a woman to really be able to define what makes her feel safe with her partner. There are levels to sex. I think most of us who are fully grown know this. I think a lot of you listening as ladies, you've had sexual experiences with different men where you can remember where you didn't enjoy it. And then there was a time with a different guy that you enjoyed it. And I think as a woman is getting to know herself sexually, she needs to sit with those experiences and say, what was it really that I enjoyed about Johnny, number one, versus why didn't I enjoy sex with Johnny, number two? And I'm going to get very graphic here, but again, it's for the purpose of conversation, and only those who are sexually mature and emotionally mature will be able to go here with me. Johnny number one could be all the things, have the right size penis and know how to, the ocean and the motion, or they used to say when we were growing up. And yet a woman can say, or a woman will have an experience with Johnny number one, I just didn't enjoy sex with him. Maybe your first husband versus your second husband, or whatever the situation. But then with Johnny number two, right, he maybe didn't have, the perfect package and all those things. But that was a pleasurable sexual experience, even if as a woman you didn't come to an orgasm with Johnny 1 or Johnny 2. And I think it's important as a woman is learning herself sexually that she thinks about those experiences and ask herself, why didn't I, or why did I? Because I find when it comes to conversations around knowing yourself as a woman, knowing what you enjoy and like sexually, people talk very surface, like, and then they get into the nasty stuff. Like, oh, that just means to get to know yourself sexually. You need to go out and have sex with all these different people, or you need to do all this weird, twisted things. No, sometimes just sitting and thinking about the experiences you've already had and which ones did I enjoy? Why did I enjoy them? What was it that made it pleasurable or enjoyable? And then the experiences that you had where you didn't enjoy it. Why didn't I enjoy it? And really thinking deeply on that. Maybe it wasn't slow enough, or maybe it was too fast, or maybe I didn't feel emotionally safe, or maybe we had an argument before our sexual encounter, and so I couldn't feel free. Because again, there are levels to sexual freedom. There are levels to being so free with the person you love that sex could just be, you feel, and I'm going to say this, that it's heaven on earth, right? But you learn when you get to that heaven on earth level, it was all about you. It was all about you learning you. And again, I don't mean physically learning you. I mean who you are in here. I'm pointing to my chest. You can't hear me. You can't see me. Like, what makes me feel safe? Remember, don't be so carnal with this that you think I'm talking about stuff I'm not even talking about. I'm talking about thoughts, attitudes, inner things. The next thing I think that I was reminded of in listening to these two phenomenal women talk is that as a woman, it's also very important to realize the role that communication plays in a healthy and pleasurable sex life. But you can't wait till the deed to try to start communicating. I don't think anyone likes instructions while the deed is going on, or, whatever. I would suggest, if I had a daughter who was of dating age or marrying age, and, you're going to teach your kid, but you also need to understand that their life is their own journey. And we can say all day, we would prefer you wait until you get married, but we also have to be real and understand that most aren't going to wait. They're going to tell us they waited, but they're not going to really wait. And so you have to educate on the waiting and on the not waiting. So if you decide not to wait, these are the things you need to know, right? You always want to arm your kid with knowledge honestly. So I think, as I was saying, communication, I think we hear this. I know in my generation we heard it all the time, but the role that communication plays. So if I had a daughter who was, going to be having sex or whatever, what I would tell her is way before, and I'm talking about, let's say I'm just going to be very, very, I'm going to be very out there with this particular example. Let's say if my daughter told me, Mom, I'm going to have sex in October. Now here we are in August. I would tell her, you need to start talking to him about, preferences, etc. now. You don't want to wait till October because you need to be able to work it out. Whatever roadblocks come up in the conversation, they would come up in the bedroom, right? And so I think a lot of women, like Cree talked about, is that sometimes things happen so fast. And I don't mean the act. I mean, we just don't know that, well, maybe we should have talked about what it's okay to do, what's not okay. For instance, she gave the example, and you'll hear her and see her say this, that one of her first sexual experiences, this guy was going down on her, and he didn't know that her last name wasn't Summer. And so he was saying, he was saying what he was saying. And she said, I was told I had a total mental block, and I could not enjoy what he was doing because I kept thinking, that's not my name. That's not my name. But, having a conversation with the person, letting him know, again, way before the act, this is who I am, this is my name, maybe things I prefer being said during the act versus not being said. And so I think it's really, really important that as a woman, if you're listening to me and you are younger, that you get very comfortable having sexual conversations with your partner. Any man that you plan on having sex with, if you're not okay, if you don't feel comfortable talking with him about sex, you shouldn't be having sex with him. If you feel nervous and, oh my gosh, I'm so embarrassed, you shouldn't be having sex with him. And again, that would have more to do with you than him. So I think conversations along the lines of preferences. What do I mean by preferences? I think all of us who are sexually mature, we know what that means. Also having conversations about, like, if you are young and you know you don't want to be a mom, at least right now, then it's important to talk about contraception. And it's important to talk about, cleanliness. Very important. I'm going to come back later and we're going to be talking about DJ Envy, talking about his wife. It's because of his wife that he learned how to clean his butt, the back of his butt, the butt crack. Well, and we're going to talk about men and personal hygiene and some things that men just don't know. And a lot of women, have had to teach a boyfriend, teach a husband or whatever, how to properly clean. So that sex is a pleasurable experience, and so again, communication is so important. It can make or break a sexual experience, even if you're married. So always keeping the lines of communication open. And again, if you are single, and you've decided you're going to have sex with Johnny, if you're too embarrassed to talk with him about what you don't like in the bedroom, you probably shouldn't. You shouldn't be having sex with Johnny. You see, it's just that simple. And then finally, something that I think is important for women. So we've talked about it's important for sexual freedom and pleasure and enjoyment and getting to those different levels of sexual freedom so that you can have the heaven on earth type experiences with the person you feel safe with, is understanding what makes you feel safe emotionally, what closes you up, what opens you up. And then being able to, like the next thing, communicate that to him. And then finally, I would say, another thing that I was reminded of in this conversation with Cree and Shan is that it's okay to not know. It's okay as a woman to grow, and you should be graceful with yourself. Like one of the things Cree was saying is that she hates there were certain things she just didn't know, because she feels like she wouldn't have had some of the bad experiences in dating that she did have. And so I think it's okay I think there's a healthy balance between wishing you knew and did something different versus living in regret and beating yourself up. Like, dang it, we have to be able to say to ourselves as women, okay, I didn't know what I didn't know. My parents didn't teach me maybe, or I didn't learn it in school or whatever. I didn't know what I didn't know. So why should I beat myself up about that? Why should I beat myself up about the first marriage or whatever? You get what I'm saying? But having a healthy dose of grace for ourselves. Because truly, we don't know what we don't know. And saying, okay, so I didn't communicate with Johnny, and whatever. But I think because we're living in a day of really, when I was growing up, they said we were living in the information age. But I think we are truly living in the information age now. One of the things I love about having a cell phone is I have one of the most valuable things in my hand. This device that I own allows me to access any information about any topic in the world that I want to know. Tell me, is that not a blessing? Especially if you are a lifelong learner like I am. It's a blessing. You're like, oh, we're so blessed. This is on the list of things I thank God for, because I remember what it was like having to get up and go to the library. I remember our daddy buying encyclopedias for us, and I had to get it off the shelf and crack it open. And then any of you guys like me in our family, then you have to buy new encyclopedias every year because they would change the information in them, right? You know, books were there's coming a day when books will be the ancient way of housing information. And so as I get ready to let you guys go, I highly recommend, if you're a woman, and you are a mature woman emotionally and sexually, I think you will enjoy this conversation. Hearing two women sit and talk who are fully grown, for real, and they know themselves, and they are comfortable with who they are, so much so that they could have an honest conversation about what opens us up as women sexually to our men versus what causes us to close, and what that would mean for us. And I'll talk to you on the next one. Bye, guys.